Hello folks, thank you for tuning in for today's Metaspec Technology Showcase. My name is Arman and today I'll be talking about Forensic Email Collector version 4, our big upcoming version. It's a major release. FEC has been at version 3 for a few years now, so it was about time for a big update. And my goal today is to do a couple of things. Number one, I want to show off what we've been working on and what's coming up soon. And also I want to give you guys kind of a high level overview of what to expect and how you can adapt your workflow to accommodate the changes here. So we had, I would say, three main goals in FEC 4. One of them was a major architectural change. Some of you might know Forensic Email Collector 3 has been using .NET Framework 4.7 for a while. We made a major update to .NET 8 with this newer version, and as far as what the users would be concerned, there are a couple of major advantages there. One of them is there's going to be some significant performance improvements. There are lots of different areas where underlying processes have been improved, like cryptography, HTTP client, and a lot of things FEC uses heavily. So there's going to be lots of cumulative improvements that add up to major changes there. Number two, with this new version, we are able to bring the dependencies with the installer. So it used to be that when you launch Forensic Email Collector or when you installed it, it would require the .NET Framework to be installed, or it would bring it with itself during the installer. Now that's no longer necessary. We bring all the dependencies, and that has a positive impact on portability. So when you use FEC in portable mode, you will be able to just copy the files along, and you don't need to assume that there's going to be .NET Framework there, as long as you're running on a supported system. And of course, there's going to be quite a few user interface improvements and other things that came with it. So the second goal we had was essentially, like I said just a minute ago, with Forensic Email Intelligence, when we designed our second software, we made quite a few improvements in the presentation of the software, like how some of the user interface elements were designed, and we wanted to bring those along to Forensic Email Collector. So that's one of the major areas, and I'm going to show some major details of that as we dig into the details here. And number three, to make things a little bit more exciting, we wanted to implement one of the most requested features that we've been talking about for a long time. And I'll kind of save that for the end of the presentation, but just to give you a little hint, it is about modern attachments, which is kind of a hot topic these days. So we'll talk about that toward the end of the presentation. So let me start by share my screen, and I'll show you some of these things. I'll start with we won't talk much about the backend stuff, but I'll show you what has changed in the user interface a little bit, and some of the new features that you should expect to see soon. All right, so let's launch FEC 4. We took care to not change the user interface much because FEC 3 has been well liked and it works well. One thing that you'll probably notice right away is the colors. You will have light and dark mode now, which is kind of a minor thing, but a lot of software tools have it now. The navigation for some of the side elements has moved to kind of like a side panel. So it used to be that if you wanted to, for example, check out the preferences and change something, you would have to navigate to a certain page and then you would have to come back from there. So now those are kind of a side panel that opens up and goes away. So it makes it a little bit easier to navigate, so you don't have to go back in navigation, because we got some feedback that we had kind of like a web browser style navigation that was stack based. So you would go back to where you used to be the last time. And apparently that was, in some cases, a little bit not super intuitive. So now navigation is going to be more linear, and you will just see these side panels open up when you need them for updates and trusted timestamping and things of that nature. Another area that has improved quite a bit, I would say, is how we have these help bubbles. It used to be that we have them kind of sprinkled everywhere, kind of like in place help as you needed, but it used to be kind of like a tooltip, which was not super easy to use because you couldn't really keep them open for a very long time, and we didn't have the ability to use rich text there or hyperlinks or anything like that. So now if you look at them, you'll see that we have panels that open up and stay put, which with rich text, kind of like HTML style, so you can have a lot of detail there. And we are able to include hyperlinks and stuff, which allow you to just navigate directly to an article where more information is needed or further research is warranted. So that should make it a little bit easier to get help on things that you need. Now, one related change as it pertains to navigation is how we handle remote authentication tokens. It used to be that you would go to a separate page and then you would copy the target email address and bring it back as your target. Now you can do that a little bit more easily, where you can import the token and automatically, without you having to do anything, if you just navigate away, it'll pre-populate that target email field with the email address from the token, if you haven't already populated it or if you haven't navigated to another page yet. If you put something else there, it's not going to touch it. Or if you already moved forward in your acquisition state and you're about to start, it's not going to go back and change anything. But if you're in the starting position, then it's just saving you a couple of clicks or steps to populate that information. Now, that's, I would say, generally what I want to touch on today as far as the UI goes, but as we walk through it, you'll see effects of this in a few areas. The next thing I want to show you is folder selection, and I'll touch on a couple of things here. One is how we do modern authentication, and two, what you see on the folder tree. There are a couple of changes there. As far as the modern authentication piece goes, there's an option here now that controls how the modern authentication is performed as far as the browser component goes. So if you don't use this option, then FEC will work as before and it's going to launch the system web browser for modern authentication. But if you wanted to have a more streamlined experience and kind of separate that from your system web browser, then you can use this embedded web view, where an embedded viewer will pop up and handle the modern authentication for you. That is kind of neat, and it kind of isolates things a little bit, for that service provider workflow. And it's even more interesting when you do modern authentication for Yahoo and AOL, because it already also automatically captures that code for you, which is neat and convenient, I would say. So I'll keep this option turned on, and I'll target Microsoft 365 mailbox here. So you see how that authentication piece goes. Just skip over these standard details. Let's pick a folder here. So you'll see that instead of launching my system browser, a dedicated panel will pop up. In this case, I have some users already signed in with that Windows support, but normally for a forensic workstation where you do work, you're not going to have that. So I would expect that to be clear for Microsoft 365, but you can set it up as you wish. So one thing that some of you who have a keen eye probably notice right away is that there are a few major differences here. One of them is that there's a search bar. The second thing is folders have symbols, like little icons, and there are more different kinds of icons that you'll see in a little bit. And there's a distinction now between regular folders and hidden folders. If a folder is hidden, then you have a special icon here that kind of indicates that it is a hidden folder. And the reason that we made that happen was because there have been some questions about, hey, some of these are kind of like system folders, and maybe we don't want to include them in every acquisition, so we want to be able to see which way a folder is set up. So there's an easy way to do that now if you wanted to. If you right-click on the tree and choose deselect hidden folders, it'll just unselect the hidden folders for you, which should make it easier to kind of focus on what you wanted to do. Another thing you can do is when you're dealing with a long folder tree like this, you can deselect all and search for folder types, and then just select the ones that you want. So that should make it easier to kind of focus on what you're looking to do. And while we're here and we have a mailbox opened, something I want to show you is a minor change to inline search based on some user feedback. In one of our recent FEC training sessions, someone suggested that it would be nice to have a syntax check option there. So when you launch inline search, there's we call this the sandbox, so you can drop some messages, test messages there, and construct your search and test it, which is the way I would typically do it. I would want to run my search and test all the edge cases and everything before I'm ready to move forward. But in some cases, you may not want to do that, and you may want to just set up your query and you want to test it. So there's a quick way to do that now. If you have your query here, you can hit this check syntax button, and it's going to tell you if the syntax looks good or if there's a major failure with parsing your query. So that should make things easier. Something recently introduced here, if you haven't seen it, is the option to normalize accented characters. So that is for languages where there's a lot of different variations of letters, like a good example might be resume, for example, where the E's might have accents or not, depending on how it's written. So if you want to normalize them so you can construct your search just one way and target all the different variations of those letters, you can turn on this option when you do inline search. All right, so that's the folder tree and modern authentication. Just to touch on that again, so the modern authentication built-in viewer is controlled here, and this is using a technology from Microsoft called WebView 2, and it requires that to have been installed. But if it's not installed, you're going to have a link here that takes you to the page where you can get the installer and install it. Typically for Windows 11, you'll have it already pre-installed. If you're using Windows 10 and if you have any other tools that require it, may have been already installed. If it's not installed, then you can just get it really easily. I would generally recommend having that because I think that's a pretty neat way to do modern authentication compared to launching the web browser. Okay, going back here, the next thing I'm going to mention, as far as we're getting closer to the, I would say, more exciting changes here, the next thing I'm going to mention is some improvements to how we handle Google Vault exports. So if you recall, recently we released some improvements to Forensic Email Collector 3 that allowed us to target an existing local Vault export as an acquisition source. And the reason we brought that feature about was that Google Vault now allows you to export emails with a reference to the hyperlinked drive attachments and the attachments themselves. So that's a really neat feature, but it's missing a few things in my opinion that makes it immediately usable. So we wanted to bring that to the FEC workflow, kind of run it through the FEC process so that it's ingestion ready. So I'll show you how that already works and what we did there as improvements real quick. So let me get you to a Vault export that I downloaded. So this folder is just my flat out downloads. I went to a local Vault export and I just downloaded everything Vault gave me and I didn't change anything. So if you look at what we get from there, we get the MD5s, which we don't really need in this context. We have the drive links exported. We have the mbox files exported, metadata XML, metadata CSV, and a few other accompanying things, and an error CSV file. So in this folder, I made a staging folder here, and the only two differences I have is that I moved the mbox files in here under a folder called mbox, so FEC can automatically pick them up, and I moved the drive files, the exported drive files, into their own separate folder, but I did not unzip them. There's no need to unzip them. FEC can take care of that. So I'm going to use this folder, the staging folder I have, and I'll target one of the email addresses here. And here we have this option to use a local Vault export. You probably recall this from before if you used this feature in the past. So switch over to this. I'm going to choose the option to populate paths from labels and include drive attachments, and just drop this staging folder I have here. And FEC will automatically pick up all the different components of the Vault export, and it'll automatically determine that the drive export is compressed, most likely, unless there's another scenario there. You can You can change that, but in this case that is accurate, so I'll keep it there. So there are a couple of differences here. One of them is there's now a link for exploring the mailboxes. And if you choose that option, FEC will get you a list of the other targets in your Vault export. So typically a Vault export is for a whole host of custodians, right? It's not just going to be for one person. So when we scan them, we're going to exclude the person that's already the target of your acquisition because you're already collecting that person's mailbox. And we're going to include all the other people's mailboxes, and you can add them as additional targets really quickly and go for a batch acquisition. The reason we brought this here was that it was not super intuitive. In the past, this was possible to do, but it required you to go scan the metadata CSV and make a list yourself and bring it in here. And apparently that was not very user-friendly, and some of our more experienced users even didn't really notice that that was an option. So that's, we wanted to make it crystal clear. So this should make it easier. And another question we get often is, what if a single custodian has multiple Mbox files or multiple drive export zips or things like that? That is all handled here, so you don't have to do anything. FEC will cycle through all the different Mbox files or multitude of drive zips, whatever you have should be fine. So this exploring the mailboxes is one improvement here. The second thing is now an additional component here is identified, and that's the errors CSV from Drive. And the reasoning for that is if there are some errors that Google Vault already brought up during its export, we want FEC to easily recognize those problems and number one, report them so that you have meaningful error descriptions coming directly from Vault, and number two, act on those and know that we're not going to be able to resolve those issues, because if Vault said it wasn't able to export the file, then there's no point in spinning our wheels trying to export that. That's not going to happen. So we will treat those as permanent errors. So let's do one example export here so you see how that would work. I'm going to skip over these case setup details. Pick another folder. Let's package one of the output types. Just as a recap for those of you who haven't used this before, this brings all the regular benefits of the FEC acquisition. So you can do the EML, MSG, PST format output. You can containerize. You can do differential acquisitions, inline search, all the good stuff, the hashing. So you have just about everything you get with an FEC acquisition, although the target is not a real provider. It's kind of a virtual provider based off of a local Vault export. And the other difference from a regular acquisition is that there is no authentication in this case, because we're not going out to Google's API and doing anything. We're just working with the local data. So that makes things go fast and pretty smoothly. So let me run through this real quick so you can see what the output looks like. So there's going to be some errors there that's coming from Vault. So let's take a look at what our output looks like. So on the output side, same as before, you have the regular email export. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but one thing that's noticeable is going to be that you have the folder structure, which is typically missing if you didn't really run this through the FEC process. You have the packaged cloud attachments, so it makes it kind of neat, and everything is in context. You have the email and you have its cloud attachments all in one place. And the other difference here is that you have the exception log as before, but now if you look at the exception log, FEC will say could not locate metadata for this drive item, and it'll list its service ID, and then it'll move forward and it will say Vault reported the following error for this item, and this is coming directly from scrolled a little too fast there. So that part in the end is coming directly from the Vault export, the error CSV that Vault provided for this item. So essentially we're carrying over the error information, so you have your errors in one place, or the FEC acquisition is more complete in terms of what it reports errors wise. And also, like I said, we treat these as permanent errors, so we're not gonna keep retrying those for no reason. So that's what we did in terms of Vault, and like I said, this is building on an existing feature, just a couple refinements here. Now getting close to I'm going to cover two more features that are interesting. The next one is very similar, but in this case we extended the Vault functionality to cover Takeout. So why not? Because it's very similar, and although there's not as much to be gained from a Takeout export process through FEC, I would say it's still valuable, because in the context of Vault, we also get the whole drive attachment packaging benefit, which is major. In Takeout, we don't have that benefit, but we still have a lot to gain from reorganizing a Takeout through FEC, and I'll show you some of the things that are at play here. So here, instead of targeting this through Gmail API, I'm going to use a local Takeout, and similar place there. I have my Takeouts folder, and this folder is the download I got directly from Takeout, and the staging folder is essentially the same thing but extracted. So I'm going to drill into the folder until I see my HTML, and this mail folder has my inbox and the user settings and signatures and all that stuff. So I'm going to stop here and take this as the path, and I'll choose this option to populate the output paths from Gmail labels. Put this as the Takeout export path, so FEC picks up the inbox folder automatically. It does not need anything else, and Google really doesn't provide much of anything else. So skip over these. Let's pick another folder here. Like I said before, you have the different output folders, the different output format options, containerization, decrypting, SMIME, and all those different goodies. And you can get the mailbox contents as you typically would. I'm probably not going to sit through this whole thing, but I'll show you at what speed it goes so you have kind of a rough understanding. So it rips through it pretty fast, although we are duplicating the output for each label, so we're actually writing a lot more than the 5217 messages here. But I'll still stop short of going through the whole thing. We don't need to wait to see it. If you look at the output, you'll see that we have our MIME folder with all the different folders created based on the labels. You'll see that we have, similar to Vault, we have file system creation timestamps, and like I mentioned in the past in other FEC presentations, these are not timestamps that are within the messages themselves. These are essentially coming from the API as internal date, which is a valuable piece of information to have, and we are able to populate them through a Vault export and through a Takeout export as well, which is neat. Something else to show here is that I just opted for the MIME output here, which looks kind of like this, a standard message. But the important thing here is that this is a high quality, high fidelity output. So you are getting full fidelity in the sense that even the cryptographic signatures, the Dikimonarch signatures, verify here. So nothing has changed in this email. That's a significant change, big enough to alter the signatures and stuff. So it's perfect for forensic preservation and analysis. The same cannot be said if you went the, for example, PST option from Google Vault, and there are some significant changes there. So there's a lot of value forensically in getting output like this. But like I said before, you don't have to stop at this MIME output with FEC in one go. You could do MSG, you could do PST, whatever you want is going to be all available. So what are some of the benefits of these two offline outputs, namely the Google Vault local workflow and the Takeout workflow? I would say a few major things we can count. Number one, you can do differential acquisition. If you're not familiar with it, I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. You can use FEC's inline search. So if the Vault export or the Takeout export has not been filtered in some way, or even if it has been filtered, you can further filter it using FEC's powerful inline search engine, which is really neat to have. You can use FEC's decryption functionality. So if there are some encrypted emails there, you can decrypt them on the fly. You can get EML, MSG, PST output simultaneously. And you can use FEC's foldering capabilities, which allows you to folder the messages based on their labels and duplicate if there are multiple labels applied to a message. And in the case of Vault, of course, there's the added benefit of marrying the parent emails with their child drive attachments and packaging them so you get that full context when you do your review or forensic analysis. So that's the main appeal of both of these features, and they are now available as separate providers in FEC4. Now, finally, to the last feature I want to talk about, and that is support for what we call direct drive. So essentially acquiring drive as a whole rather than targeting drive attachments. So this is something that's been requested a lot. And if you have been playing with FEC before, you know that FEC can target drive and drive revisions of items, but it's in the context of emails always. So when you do a drive acquisition, essentially we're targeting whatever drive items are referenced within the emails themselves, but FEC did not have the ability to take a step back and target a custodian's drive as a whole, or target a bunch of custodians from a Google Workspace organization and get their drives or team drives, shared drives, and things of that nature. But I think it's safe to say that that was probably the number one requested feature. And there are a few reasons for that. One of them is there are a lot of added benefits in how FEC does things. For example, we have this nice authentication options where we support enterprise authentication with domain-wide delegation. Of course, two-factor authentication, even single sign-on is supported, anything with YubiKeys, passkeys, and all that stuff. So you have a lot of, there's remote authentication, so you have a number of options in terms of authentication flexibility. Number two, we always have this really cool in-place search capability, which allows you to narrow things down really quickly. So it's good to be able to leverage those things, and other benefits like preserving file system metadata, containerization into disk images, and all that stuff. So it's good to be able to use those things, but target drive instead. So we have that option now, and I'll show you briefly how it works. So let's import a token to authenticate. Email address will be populated for us. So now you'll see that including Gmail is an option at this point. Actually, this could have been done before too, because you were able to acquire, for example, Google Calendar only without Gmail. So we could have made this option happen sooner, but now it's officially here. So you can, if you wanted to, uncheck the Gmail option, or you can keep it checked and have everything going at the same time. So you could include Gmail and Calendar and fetch the drive attachments and revisions and all that stuff, and target drive too, all in one acquisition. But those parts we've covered before, so I'm not going to go through that now. What I'm going to focus on today is the direct drive stuff. So let's move on to connecting here. Make a folder there. You'll notice that we have the option to containerize here, and this is just controlling the scheduling of containerization like before. So you can always containerize as a post-acquisition action or as a quick action at the conclusion of your acquisition. So you don't have to check this here, but if you check it, FEC will automatically schedule the containerization job to run as soon as your acquisition finishes. So you don't have to do that as a separate step, just to streamline your workflow there. So connecting here, so we see my drive here as an option. In some cases where there are shared drives or team drives in the Google Workspace environment, you will see multiple different folders here that are selectable. In this personal scenario, I have this My Drive folder as a single one. And if you just proceed with this acquisition now, you'll just collect the whole drive, basically. But in the interest of time, I'm going to narrow things down by some in-place search terms, and that'll give me the opportunity to talk about how drive in-place search works. So let me see if I can pull up some documentation here to show you from Google what you can search for in Drive. So here's Google's documentation on Google Drive search terms, and we'll actually make our own documentation on this soon, where you click on the syntax help in FEC and it will bring you something similar. We just haven't done it yet because it would kind of ruin the surprise, I thought, so it's coming. So we have these operators that you can use, which is pretty comprehensive. It is unfortunately a little bit different than what you may have been used to from Gmail API. There are just more things here, but still fine. There are quite a few different fields you can search in. You can definitely search by metadata like the creation time or modification time of items. You can search for items by owners or parents. You can search by visibility, different properties of a file, trashed items. You can search for their text or contents, indexable properties and file contents, which is really neat. File names, MIME types. So there's quite a bit that you can do, and it's a powerful search engine. So if you follow this link here, it gives you some examples on some of the things you can search for. So like files that contain a certain thing in their name or something in their full text or different date parameters, so owners and things like that. So let's use some of those ideas to construct our own search. So I'm going to search for files that are owned by this user. So let's start by putting that in here. So I want this to be in the owners collection. A file can have multiple owners, but in this case this will be in the owners collection. And then I'll say created time is going to be smaller than June 1st, 2022, and modified time smaller than 2021, February 1st. And MIME type, just to add some different terms here, should not be, let's say, should not be a presentation. If I didn't mistype something, let me double check that. That looks about right. Let's run it to see if it goes through. Well, I messed something up there. Let me see if I can application and owners and created time and modified time. MIME type, that doesn't look bad to me, but let me see if I can copy this script that I had written before to see if I have a typo there. Yeah, so there was a typo there somewhere. Let's see if I can compare those two to see what I did wrong. So this is my correct query, and if I can go back here, oh, maybe I was not able to go back, but anyway, yeah, so that I must have had a typo there. So let's go with this correct version of the search just so we get the results we want. So let me type that up again and run it. All right, so I get these 13 results here. The files have different icons based on what kind of file type they are. Of course, to make this process easier, we will also introduce Query Builder, so you don't have to have the same issues that I just had and have a typo or something like that. It should be easier to construct these date searches and stuff. Once you narrow this down, you can save it, and just like how we do with Gmail API, it'll list the items there, and it'll only touch those specific drive items that we are targeting with the in-place search, and you'll get them downloaded. So let's finish this up and go take a look at the output here. So if we were to open this output folder, so now there used to be this items folder here in FEC's output directory. Now there's also a drive items folder, and this will have the folder structure that the items came from. Inside there we have our various items with their file system timestamps captured, and there's gonna be the folder structure as well. So in this case we have kind of a deeper structure with multiple levels, for example, with their dates and times and all the details. And of course there will be a metadata export that gives you full paths and stuff. So there have even been some requests about, for example, getting a file listing from a drive, which is not super simple to do if you haven't written a script yourself or something along these lines. This should even happen with that. Even if you don't intend to collect the entire drive, you could set things up and target the entire drive, let FEC explore it, take the snapshot, and it'll export out a list of all the items that are in the drive, and you'll be able to just get your file listing with full path information, dates and times and file names and everything, and go from there. But of course you can go and acquire as well. Let's try out this containerization. So that's essentially very similar to what we used to do for the regular output. This time you'll get a container, a vhtx container that has the drive suffix, and it's hash calculated here. You can mount this, throw this into your favorite forensic tool for ingestion, whatever you want to do. So this, so let's talk a little bit about how this ties into modern attachments a little bit, because you might say, hey, this is drive stuff, but what does this have to do with modern attachments of emails? Well, in my mind, number one, this is useful to have to be able to target drive as a whole, and probably we will follow this up with other similar providers as well. But in the context of drive attachments, here's how it could be useful. Let's say that you have some data collected from some other places, so you didn't run an FEC acquisition, but you have some data from mobile device extraction. There might be text messages there, there might be Slack exports, Teams, and all kinds of different data sources where you have some drive hyperlinks and drive, so indirectly drive service identifiers, and you have some things you want to tie them to, but you have no way of acquiring those items and their revisions. You're also interested in their revisions. So how do you accomplish that? And this is one of these areas where FEC can be helpful because it has that differential acquisition functionality. So let's do something along those lines so I can show you how that would look. So let's close out of this and dig into my logs and pick a couple of items and pretend that there was a list of identifiers we had lying around from some other acquisition. So let me pick these two guys up here, for example, and save them over here as two service IDs. So let's make a folder here. I'll call this something like that. So now, essentially, that'll be our starting point. So we have two service IDs, and the legal team is interested in, let's say, pulling the revisions of these documents. How do we go about doing that? Well, here's how we can do that with the new workflow here. So you can import the token as usual. I'm going to include drive and drive revisions. So because I'm interested in the revisions in this case, you could do this for drive entirely too, although it could take some time, but this is a better data set to show this on. And let's pick another output folder here. Let's do 5, and then I'll tap into differential acquisition here. Its documentation has been slightly revised here, and there's now a hyperlink for more details. But the idea here is that I'm going to use that path that I just created where I drop my TSV file, right? And I'll use this as an inclusion list. So I don't want to exclude those items. Typically in a differential acquisition, the standard mode of operation we have is to exclude items that we've already acquired so that we can get a delta acquisition of what's new. But the reverse is also useful. In some cases, you might use the list as an inclusion list, and we might just target those specific items and leave everything else behind. So that's what I want to do now. I want to use those service identifiers as an inclusion list and target those. So let's get the mailbox. So now I don't need to run an in-place search because I know what I'm targeting, so I'll just leave that be. Although you could, if, for example, if drive is really extremely large and you want to just focus on a smaller data set first and run the differential acquisition on that, that could also work, but in this case it's not necessary. You'll notice here that we have kind of a different type of indicator for differential acquisition, so it'll be total versus what comes after the differential part has been applied. So we got the 43 total items in this drive, but we have 2 to collect, and that's already done. Let's see here. So one of my items was another file, Word document or Google document, let's say, and it was under this folder. So we have the document itself, and then there's going to be the revisions of that file pulled through Drive API. And then another one was this Excel file, Excel spreadsheet, or let's say Google Sheet. and then the revisions of that Google Sheet here required. So like I said before, the main goal here is to address that issue of how do you have your identifiers from someplace else and target the revisions of these items. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that question. That's a very common request. And this actually, as we were getting ready for the presentation, it came up yet again. And in this case, I'm going to discuss this after this so we can kind of point at what we've already done here and maybe fill in the gaps if more changes are necessary. So I think that's a good stopping point for today. This covers what we are anticipating to release soon. So as you can imagine, it is in internal testing now. So we're going through the testing for FEC4. I don't imagine this will be a very long process. Probably within a week or two at the latest, we should wrap things up and get it ready for release. As always, feedback is very important. So if you guys have any suggestions on what we should build next, that would be really helpful. Most of the cool features in FEC originated from user requests. So if you don't really bring up what you're interested in seeing, then we will know in some cases. Let me turn my attention to the chat here because I see there are a couple of questions here. One of them is, what do you need to include in the takeout? Mail and Drive for the Google. So for Google Vault, you want to get the mail data plus the Drive hyperlinks. So Google Vault exports the mail data in Mbox format and the hyperlink Drive files. For Gmail takeout for free accounts, all you need is mail and as Mbox again. Drive is not applicable in this case, although that is something that might be possible to do in the future. For example, get Drive and Gmail and have FEC extract the identifiers from the emails there and see if any of those happen to be in the Drive export, and if they are, kind of mirror things up. So that's something that's in the back of our minds, but perhaps further down the road. Let's see, another question. Is the Drive file ID one of the available search parameters? Well, I think that question is was probably asked before I showed the differential acquisition part, because the goal there is to be able to focus on the file IDs. So you should be able to do what you're thinking to do with the differential acquisition. I don't think you are able to, off the top of my head, I don't think you can search for the file ID, but I'm not sure. You can check out that Google document to be doubly sure. But yeah, differential acquisition should come to the rescue there. One request there, well, good, some requests are already coming. One request is to feed a target revision date into the differential source ID. Yes, we are thinking about a couple of things there right off the bat. One of them is maybe to include in your differential source file some type of control number parameter. So if you can recycle that and put it back out, so you have something else to tie things together with other than the service ID. Although service ID is usually good enough too, but if you want to have like a control number, weights number, some internal identifier there, could be good to be able to import that and re-export it. And the second thing is, this already came up at least twice, to feed as part of the differential acquisition workflow a target date, so we get the revision that's closest from the earlier side to that date. So kind of to emulate that behavior where we can include a Drive attachment and revisions, but limit the revisions to the latest revision before the send date of the parent email. So do the same, but with the direct Drive workflow. That's definitely on the to-do list. We're thinking about that. Let's see here. Which tool are you using to do the presentation? I'm not sure what part of the presentation you mean, but if you're thinking about the annotations, for that I'm using a tool called Zoomit, but the video part is OBS, which does the kind of the streaming and the different switches between the scenes and all that stuff. One more question. If you have an offline Google Vault Drive collection, will that be like Google Vault, or let me see. Oh, so a way to have a Google Drive export as an offline, a local acquisition source. Um, well, I haven't really given that any thought yet, and the reason for that is I can't right off the bat think of like the benefits that one would get immediately from having FEC reorganize the drive export, because the drive export is already a drive export. I guess one thing that we might be able to do nicely is the foldering stuff, which we do quite well already at this point. So that might be a benefit there. But because there's no marrying of emails and stuff, I don't know if that'll happen. But one thing that I think would be a benefit potentially is if we took, like I was saying earlier, if we took an offline drive export in connection with an offline, let's say Gmail export, or maybe an online Gmail acquisition, and reuse that stuff from the offline drive export to kind of fill in the gaps, that could be a huge time saver in some cases, and could be beneficial. So that's something we'll definitely consider. There's just like so many combinations of things you can do with these APIs. Oh yeah, so for the, I'm getting a request for the links here for the Google Doc. So that's gonna be this document. So I'll post this on here. And that is essentially a way to bounce off of this, bounce into the second document where you have examples. So you can just get in there and see some query string examples that they put together. And that should give you some good starting points. Like I said, we will expand FEC's in place search for Gmail documentation. We currently cover Gmail API and Calendar API there. Now there's going to be an additional section for Drive API, and you'll have all this stuff, or not all of it, but some good examples as it pertains to forensic acquisitions there. Can you pull audit-related metadata related to edit and view history for drive files and revisions? Yeah, that's a good point. So we do pull some metadata in terms of permissions and stuff. Currently not, I don't think we do edit and view history, but yeah, that's actually a very good point. We want to know what metadata you need as part of these drive exports, because now that we tap into drive directly, there's quite a few things you can extract from drive API. I would say maybe too many things. So we're not getting all that, because everything you ask for is essentially counting toward your throttling caps and API and rate limits. So we're trying to be somewhat frugal and trying to get the least amount of data that we can get away with. But we have incorporated already some things that have been asked before, like permission information and all that stuff. But if there are other things that you would like to see, especially once you get FEC4 in front of you and you play with it and you look at the logs and see what's there, definitely send me a note and say, hey, it would be cool to have this in the metadata, or maybe have an option to add some of these fields so there's more information there. Good question from Corey. This is something that actually we wanted to get into version 4, and we were debating if we should wait for it or not. Corey is asking if we have an option to update, if I understand correctly, update FEC directly from within the program, like automatically, completely hands-off, or do you need to download yourself and run the installer? Currently, it is the same way as before, but there is on our to-do list and close to the top. It wasn't as close to the top as this drive stuff, and there are some technical challenges there that we need to get past, but that's definitely in my mind an important feature to implement. So that's coming soon. Thanks for asking. Oh, this is great. I've had quite a few questions. I would say maybe unusually large amount of questions, which makes me think that there's some good engagement. So you guys were interested in this stuff, which is awesome. Well, I'll wait for a few more seconds to see if there's anything else. And by the way, I'm only seeing the questions from, I think, YouTube. So if there's anything else that I didn't see, I apologize. You can just send me an email, and I'll reply to every email. But in any case, like I said, wait for this to be released soon. I think that this will be. I think you'll definitely notice the performance improvements to all of those are kind of back end things, and I didn't really talk too much about it. The upgrade there to the new .NET stuff is really major, so that alone is worth, I think, bumping up the version to 4. But with this direct drive stuff, I think we'll also open another channel. And along those lines, another thing that we'll be very interested in hearing about is what providers you run into the most. Because now that we do direct drive, we could very well do direct OneDrive or direct Dropbox or Box or what have you, or AWS like S3 or something like that. They all fall into the roughly the same pattern for us, but which one do you run into the most, or where do you have the most pain points? Because there are some possibilities to kind of like mount those storage services as read-only drives and then acquire from there, but I've personally run into a lot of issues with that. That was one community thread I think recently on our Metasploit community, and I was talking about how in some scenarios, for example, if the paths if the files have invalid paths in them in the file system that you mount as like is NTFS, then some tools completely drop those files and you don't even see them. And if it's an unfortunate scenario where it's actually a main folder, then you just lose like a whole section of drive and you don't even see about it. So there are definitely some benefits to doing this type of a API-based acquisition with in-place search and different authentication options. So we will probably endeavor to bring the stuff into FEC little by little for different providers. I realized that this could have probably have been a separate tool altogether, like a cloud storage collector type thing. And we did give that some thought briefly, but I think it's better to just build it more into FEC because there are some synergies with this mountain attachment stuff, like I said, and also kind of reward the user base we have that have stuck with us all these years with FEC and provide them more value and more features within the same tool without having to get something else. So we're happy with the path that we selected. In any case, oh yeah, another question about packaging support for M365 premium exports. And another request for OneDrive SharePoint, so both on the Microsoft front. For Microsoft 365 premium exports, that is something that's coming up, and that is something that we had just started looking at, as you know, but we didn't get to wrap it up because we were already at a point where we were wrapping up FEC4 and we kind of got to a cutoff point for new features, because if you never stop adding new stuff, then it's never going to finish. So we had to kind of stop thinking about new stuff and wrap up what we had to release. But once we have this out and at a good point, we will revisit the Microsoft 365 premium exports, similar to what we do for the local Google Vault workflow, and look into packaging options there. And again, feedback request. If you guys are running into this, let us know. The more requests there is for something, the more we are convinced that, okay, this is something that the industry at large needs. So we spend more time on developing that. But that's definitely something we're looking at, and it seems simple enough. I don't think it's going to be a major problem to build something like that. And I see that there's a lot of value in using the exports that you can easily get from something like Purview or Vault, because a lot of companies are using those tools that are already built in. So why not, instead of fighting against it and trying to be like an alternative to it, we try to be a tool that complements those exports. So yeah, use Purview or Vault by all means, and if you want, use FEC on top of that to make things work a little smoother if you need that. All right, well, we're getting, I think, close to the cutoff point here, so I don't want to go over the hour. So I think I will wrap up here. But if you guys have any questions that you haven't thought to ask, or if you're watching this after the fact and you think of something, then you know where to find me. You can reach out to me via email, or if you don't have my email, send me a note on LinkedIn or something like that, and we'll be in touch. And you should be expecting this to come like I said, probably within a week or two. And in the meantime, also, like I said, any feedback is highly appreciated. If there are some things here that you like, that's great to know. If there are some metadata fields that you want to have from Drive, that would be helpful. If there are different providers you want to see as cloud data sources, we want to know. So just let us know how we can improve the tool to work better for you. Thanks a lot for taking the time and joining this today.